So I've been thinking about the generational differences between boomers, Gen X. We don't talk about Gen X. Millennials, and I guess Gen Z. Is that the spectrum? And it's interesting that we skip Gen X, right? Everybody does get a sense of the boomers because the trends were longer in the past, so you could have a pretty long stretch of, the decade after World War II was pretty the same for everybody. Um, I think it's interesting that millennials are what, like, currently like 27 to 42 years old or something. I mean, that's a big bracket. I'm very surprised that it's not chopped up more, but whatever. And then Gen Z are the youngins, you know, young 20s and below or whatever. Gen Alpha, you know what I mean? I don't know, whatever. The system's stupid in its first place, but I've been thinking about it. And I've been thinking about the psychology of the boomers and the way in which they really had a unique, they got handed the most unique golden ticket to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that any generation in human history has ever gotten. The children of the first peace, especially in the United States, where this really incredible, unlikely Goldilocks situation in the world happens, right where we connect to all of our technology. We become the global hegemon with all of the manufacturing ability, all of the financial ability, and all of the naval and military capacity, and the entire rest of the world has been bombed to shit. We're the only ones standing. And then they grew up in that, and the inevitable blossoming of it's like an algae bloom. It was inevitable with that set of circumstances that things would expand in the United States. And periods of expansion, especially when they're broad, make it easy for everybody to get in on board, right? A rising tide truly does lift all boats. We just haven't seen the tide rise in a long time, but they did. Dude, this is fucking incredible. Anybody with a boat gets lifted up. And even if you don't have a boat, you're swimming, you're all right, But that period is over. Officially. We're never getting that back. We're never going to be as fiscally solvent as we were then. We're never going to return to good wages like they had then. We're not going to return to being the world's powerhouse for manufacturing. And we need to absolutely divorce ourselves from all of that. Unfortunately, that period of development was also the period of, we developed a lot of systems and took them to the next level at the beginning, right? So think about how college education changed. It used to be that college really was for academically minded people, and it was a minority of the population. It was an outlier thing to do, kind of like studying for the clergy, right? It was there, but it was doing another role. Then, with the increase in the need, the algae blossom post World War II, where we got to, make a bunch of money from, selling fertilizers and all of the byproducts of innovation, which came from conflict, World War I, World War II, etc., the ongoing war that never stopped, honestly. Um, it just made sense to go to school because that's what made sense at the time. If you had any degree, um, competent or otherwise, it was great for you to go to school. And so everybody kind of trended around that, right? Well, so that was the early days of the college system, which were great when it was like $100 to go to school, right? Now we have these $60,000 a year tuitions, right? We need to just simply say that was for boomers and not for us, and get rid of it. I don't want to. They maxed it out, developed it around a trend which is no longer existent. We just simply do not live in that future, in that economy. We're not going to be able to get it back. And so we have a distinct mismatch between everything which was designed for boomers and for what we are going to need when we don't have the boomers anymore. When the people for whom the system is built are in the ground, rest in peace, right? I don't mean that negatively, I mean that from a demographics perspective. All of these legacy institutions which served those people will disappear or collapse or transform. So it is inevitable in 20 years that the systems that worked for them but not for us will go away. I think it's rather foolish of us to keep using them for 20 years instead of dismantling them faster and developing the alternatives. And I believe that it is going to be the requirement of our generations to emotionally have to overcome an enormous amount of societal conditioning, which was simply the product of propaganda, profit, and business, just like always. We were conditioned as a workforce into being a workforce / consumer base, and they trained us to be the unit of commerce that they wanted us to be, right? These systems were not for us. They were the factory around which we are being farmed, right? And now we're at the tail end where they're just squeezing the last out from it because they know there's not a future in this. If our factory breaks down, they're not going to fix it. They're going to build something new with robots that doesn't require these blood monkeys driving their flesh wagons. Only insofar as the ones with a profit interest in, servicing our flesh wagons while we die. Wage slave maintenance and death extraction is one of the last things that will ever go away. Once they got that leech on us, they don't let it go, right? So they're going to take our money from our sickness and from overwork and from the consequences of being a wage slave in a factory farm that is killing us. And they'll promise the world, and then they won't deliver it, and they'll say, oh yeah, sorry, corporations are just pieces of paper. Well, except for according to Citizens United, they're actually citizens and they have the right to First Amendments, but they can just simply die. All they gotta do is go bankrupt right away. Oh, sorry, our assets are gone. But the extraction for the 20 years prior on a model which was not sustainable, the people get paid every day. They made their money. They leveraged off that business. They don't care that at the end it doesn't turn into a 100-year business. And we just eat the loss collectively of them having taken those resources and siphoned off their part and then left us with shit. And whether we start dealing with this today or we start dealing with it 15 years from now, it doesn't matter. It's the same fucked up problem. And I personally believe that we can just start working. It's better to start working on it sooner. And the way it's going to work, I believe, is that millennials, elder millennial, I'm 41 years old. Fuck me, I'm old. And we got to team up with guys in their late 20s. Just form a officer enlisted, mentor. I don't know how you describe it, but it's one of the traditional masculine hierarchies, right? If you're in a fire department, older guys are captain and you've got your younger squad. We all like that model, but we really need to, and we need to tactically move against the boomers. We have to create a revolutionary mindset which anticipates the collapse of empire. If we're going to build anything that inspires our hearts, that is worth committing our lives to, it is going to be more difficult. We have to preemptively let go. We don't let go of the dying ship. We are being dragged under the water because we are holding on to the railings of the Titanic because we have a good view from where we are. We're like, oh, I really have a good view. No, we need to start by letting go of whatever place here I am. I got my spot, and I'm really lucky to have gotten it. A lot of people don't have a spot at all. We have that attitude about our financial and situation, our security, our place in life. They got us scared, bro. That if you lose your spot in line, you're fucked. You know what happens? You fall off into the we didn't hear from him again. What happens to people in the United States who, yeah, like homelessness, the way in which we just disappear, right? If you lose your ability to pay your rent, have the car, like if you're no longer a functional debt wage slave, um, it gets grim, but it gets lonely and quiet and dark and silent. It's we don't talk about what happens to people who fall apart and can't get it back together. And increasingly that's happening because the situation on the ground is just so much harder than it used to be. I was lucky. I spent my 20s being an adventurer, man. You know? I took I worked more hours. I was very thrifty. I saved aggressively, and then I traveled on shoestrings. So I leveraged what I could really hard, but I got to go all around the world, man. I mean, I paid for my college education almost entirely by working seasonal restaurant jobs. I worked on the Outer Banks in North Carolina for that. But then I've also worked seasonally elsewhere. I did the ski seasons up in Colorado. I did the English teacher seasons in Spain. I did a year of working holiday visa in Australia. Working their tourism and hospitality sectors. Um, and so I was regularly changing. The thing about working in hospitality, like especially like a restaurant, you could be making because you're getting paid a percentage of the meal. If you focus on high end restaurants, you will be making good money. And as things get more expensive, you actually have an automatic pay adjustment because people are still tipping their, you're either a 10, 15, or 20% tipper, or maybe 18 if you're weird. But most people are what they are, right? That's how much they tip, almost regardless of whether it's really good, unless it's really good or really bad. But mostly they're like, I put 15 because that's what's fair, is whatever. So when the meal costs X amount more for food costs, that person is still paying you a percentage of your tip. So you stay current with rising prices. So that's one of the good things about working in hospitality. And you also so that job has kept up. It's a very well paid job. Being a good bartender can make you a lot of money. A lot of negative side effects to it and all that blah blah blah. But for that time at least, it was really good. And so I'd work seasonally, the ski season or the surf season. And at the end of them, it was normal to be like, dude, we're not going to be busy for another 8 months. We'll have a light off season, but we don't need full staff. But when it's 4th of July or when it's Christmas, we need all hands on deck in these places. So it's cool is that you can work hard for 4 months in an area, seriously stack cash working multiple jobs because everybody is like willing to accommodate the fact that there's so much work and so little staff. Housing, of course, is always the problem in these tourist areas. And then you could take your cash and then go and do something for a period before you go and do it again. And so when I moved that often, it meant that I saw how much does a room cost for a month in these places? How easy is it to get a house? How available are it? I watched what happened with Airbnb. Airbnb killed what I was doing. It used to be you could just get a place to stay for $400 a month. It's not going to be great, but all those spaces were what got converted into Airbnb. So what I've seen is that the life that I lived is no longer viable because everything has gotten more expensive. Housing has gotten more expensive. And you can't, because of the housing being unavailable, it's harder to move places. So you can't just say, I'm going to pick up and move out of town. And I'm aware of how restricted that is. But I saw the world before, man. And so I realized that, if we're going to have a life that's worth living, it's going to be us working together multi-generationally. And I've seen how everybody younger than me got fucked out of everything. You know, however fucked I feel like I am, I know the people after me are way more fucked. And so I want to team up to work together to live the life that's more fun, where we have a vision of like, how does this work? Because right now we are wage slaving in the shadow of a system built for boomers that will end with them dying and having the state and the system siphon all of their wealth off collectively, and it'll be the next greatest transfer of wealth. And then we'll be left saying, but I specialized in boomer maintenance services or whatever. And then when there's no more boomers to service maintenance or whatever, what will we have left? I want to build now what we will replace the system with. And I want to aggressively take back what's been stolen from us. Let's work together and build a future worth fucking living.